Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. So a few days ago, I enjoyed doing a video about none other than the great Rocky Marciano. Rocky, of course, remains to this day the only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated. Rocky had a record of 49-0 and retired in 1955. And I thought that maybe once a week or so, I would spend a little time doing a career retrospective about great fighters of the past, fighters who may or may not have fought during my lifetime. And in each case, I'll ask the same question. Do we today, in 2025, overrate those fighters? Do we underrate those fighters? Or do we kind of put those fighters in just about their right historical context? And of course, I'm very open to suggestions about who I should be talking about, as well as your thoughts about the video in question. The comments place of the YouTube video is the perfect place to leave them. There's tons of really good video documentaries out there with lots of film footage for those who are interested. But consider this to be more like a bunch of guys in a sports bar shooting the breeze about their favorite fighters from the past and just kind of having a chat. That's the purpose of this channel, is for people who are like-minded, who share the same interests, to have a conversation. So without further ado, let's move on. Floyd Patterson. Floyd Patterson was the man who, for most of the time between Rocky Marciano's retirement in '55 and the vicious seizure of the heavyweight title by Sonny Liston in '62, occupied the role of heavyweight champion of the world. Let's have a chat about Floyd. Floyd Patterson was born in 1935. He was born in Waco, in North Carolina, though he spent his childhood in New York. He was one of 11 kids, and it was undoubtedly a very impoverished upbringing. He skipped school. He was stealing, mostly actually food to bring home to his mom. But by the age of 10, he found himself in reform school, which his mom subsequently said was probably the very, very best thing to ever happen to her son. Floyd takes up boxing by the age of 14. He's turned his life around. He's learned his lesson. Excuse me. And he's so good at it, boxing that is, that by the age of 17, he's representing the US at the Olympics. In 1952 Helsinki Olympics, he wins the gold medal in the middleweight division. And at this time, Customado, who many of you will know as the father figure and initial mentor for Mike Tyson, had taken a keen interest in young Floyd Patterson and brought him along and had taught him that style that the newspapers called the peekaboo style. Again, the style that Tyson had, certainly in his heyday. He turned professional after the Olympics, and he took an early loss, actually. He was beaten by the former light heavyweight champion, Joey Maxim. And at this time, Patterson was boxing at the light heavyweight division. When Rocky retired in '55, people were thinking that Floyd was, a top light heavyweight. He wasn't the champion, but he was a top light heavyweight prospect, contender rather. But he moved to heavyweight, and he got a rating by the Ring magazine. And he was entered in, at that time, it was a 6-man competition to figure out who was going to occupy the vacant title that Rocky had retired from. So after beating Hurricane Jackson, Floyd Patterson faces Archie Moore. Now, Archie Moore, of course, was the last fighter that Rocky had beaten. And I'm just going to go to my dates. I've got some notes here. So that fight took place, Patterson and Archie Moore, on November the 30th, 1956. Patterson wins this by a 5th-round knockout, and he became the youngest heavyweight champion ever, a feat that wasn't beaten until Mike Tyson beat it some 30 years later. Floyd Patterson was 21 years of age. He was also the the first Olympic gold medalist to win the heavyweight championship of the world. Though, of course, his gold medal was in the middleweight division. Floyd then goes on to beat a number of sort of lesser rated contenders, including Pete Rademacher, who was an Olympic gold medalist making his debut in the professional arena, which is somewhat unusual. He also beat the British champion Brian London, and he met the top number one contender Ingemar Johansson from Sweden in June of 1959. The fight was stopped. Let me just check. Yeah, the fight was stopped in the third round after Patterson had hit the canvas 6 or 7 times. And so we now have a Swedish world heavyweight champion, Ingemar Johansson, who had what he called his Thunder und Lightning punch, also known as Ingo's Bingo. To this day, he remains Sweden's most famous boxer. Possibly the second most famous is today's fighter, Otto Wallin. Sweden is not known for producing lots of heavyweight boxing fighters, or champions rather. But Ingemar Johansson was the first and, to this date, only Swedish heavyweight champion, having put down young Floyd Patterson. Now, Patterson gets a rematch, and the rematch was held on June the 20th, 1960. So we're now talking of within my lifetime. And he became the first man to regain the heavyweight championship of the world. And let me just see. Ingemar Johansson was knocked out and was out for several minutes before he was back to his stool. So it was an emphatic victory in the rematch. So not only is Floyd Patterson the first Olympic gold medalist to win the world heavyweight champion, he's the youngest to win the world heavyweight championship, and he was the first person in history to regain the world heavyweight championship. Now that was a feat that had been tried by many, including the great Joe Louis. So certainly not a feat to be sniffed at. And of course we're talking of the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Excuse me. There was a rubber match between Johansson and Patterson won that fight as well. So Patterson, people say that he ducked the up-and-coming Sonny Liston. I would say that his management team, particularly Customado, steered Patterson away from Sonny Liston, not just because of Sonny Liston's fearsome reputation. At this point in time, Sonny Liston was clearing out the division, but because of the allegations that there was a mob connection to Sonny Liston. But eventually, Patterson meets Liston. And it's to Patterson's great credit that he took that fight. Because I think Patterson could have avoided that fight. And I don't think he would have been held to the same degree of scrutiny and criticism as a modern day fighter would. And they say that because Sonny Liston was viewed as this former felon who had been in jail for robbery and violence, and just a vicious man who people felt did not have a right to compete for the heavyweight championship of the world. Different times indeed. But Floyd Patterson took the fight, and I think, as we all know, Floyd Patterson was destroyed in the first round. I remember my father telling me that Sonny Liston was just too much for Patterson. By that, I believe he meant just too much in every respect. He was too big, too strong, too powerful. I remember reading that Floyd Patterson felt so embarrassed that he'd lost, that he wore a disguise to leave the arena. So hurt and so upset was he. He gets a rematch against Sonny Liston, as a former champion deserved, and unfortunately the result was exactly the same. The next time that Floyd Patterson had an opportunity to fight for a world title was against Muhammad Ali. On November the 22nd, 1965, but he went into this fight with Ali with, people think, maybe a slip disc or some other chronic back injury. And you can see that if you watch the fight, even between rounds, Patterson is sort of being lifted up as though they're trying to pop his disc back into place. Well, his loss against Ali, of course, was almost expected. I mean, it would have taken an incredible fighter to beat a mid-1960s version of Ali, let alone a fighter who was at that time, injured and certainly not at his best. However, Patterson shouldn't be remembered for just losing against Liston and then losing against Ali, because he did beat George Chuvalo and he also beat Eddie Machin, both of whom were top 10 contenders and very, very formidable fighters in their own right. I'm just going to switch my notes page here. Yeah, he lost against Ali in 65 and then he lost again in 1972. By 1972, Floyd Patterson was very, very much past his best. But I think that, if you take a cold, sort of objective look at Floyd Patterson, we should look past the losses against Liston. We should consider the losses against Ali to be certainly no shame. And we should remember the fact that he was able to come back and regain the title against Ingemar Johansson, a feat that nobody else had been able to do. And I think it's clear that if you watch his fights, Patterson was an absolute gentleman in the ring. In fact, when he knocked down some of his opponents, he sort of goes over to try and pick them up. Like he really comes across as an absolute gentleman, a sportsman, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. A person who didn't seem to have malice in the ring. Obviously, he was there to do a job and he did it very, very well. But he comes across as a real gentleman. He's also a fighter who was not only well respected amongst the African American community, who were, of course, very pleased after the Marciano years to once again to see an African American as the world heavyweight champion, but he was also loved by white America. And it's kind of crazy when you say these things now because, but pre-civil rights America, certainly a different time, a different place, something I don't really profess to know anything about. I was not born in America, and of course, I'm a white guy. But Floyd Patterson definitely crossed that sort of line between, he was liked by all sectors of society. And maybe in part it's because he portrayed himself as an elite black athlete in the way that white America wanted to see their elite black athletes behave. I mean, they were different times, and times that I think that we're all very pleased that we've moved on past. After boxing, there's one other fight I want to mention before we talk about post-boxing. He had an opportunity one more time to fight for a version of the title, and he fought against Jimmy Ellis. Now, if you watch that fight, it was a decision loss. If you watch that fight, a strong argument could be made for him having beaten Jimmy Ellis. And that was in 1968. So there was an opportunity for a piece of the title, but unfortunately Floyd didn't get that, of course. But like I say, after boxing, and he retired in 1972. I was a kid at the time. I was in high school, and I remember when he retired. He stayed closely connected to boxing, and he became the New York State Athletic Commission chairman in the 1990s. It's a very influential position. Eventually, he passed away in 2006 in New York, and he had been suffering from Alzheimer's in his latter years. So how do we rate Floyd Patterson? Well, he doesn't make my lifetime top 10. So obviously, if he doesn't make my lifetime top 10, he's not going to make the all-time top 10. But I do think that modern day fans underrate him a little bit. You know, conversations that I can recall having over the years with boxing fans, people tend to be dismissive of him, remembering only the absolute beatdowns he took at the hands of Sonny Liston. And I think that's unfair. I think a more balanced approach would be to recognize that Floyd Patterson was a very talented boxer, a very powerful two-handed boxer, a natural light heavyweight who had sort of almost quite literally punched above his weight, as the expression is. So I think that being the fact that he was the first Olympic medalist, the youngest to win the title, and the first to regain the title in a very tough era, and undisputed, so not just regaining a piece of the belt, I think we underrate him. I'm not sure where he would sit in my lifetime ratings. I'd like to say inside the top 20. Let me know what you think. And let me know if you think that it's a good idea that we have these conversations about old-time fighters. The way I see it is that if nothing else, and you're watching this video, you might say, oh, I didn't know enough about this guy. Let me go and look at somebody else's big video documentary with fight footage or whatever. And it's a way of keeping the memory alive, because each of the fighters that I plan on talking about, and I'm actually not sure who I'm going to talk about, it'll depend on how I feel. But everybody I'll talk about, you know, achieved a lot, were brave men, and were beloved during their eras. And I think if you're a fan of the sport like me, it's part of that rich history of boxing that we all like. So that's why I plan on talking about old-time fighters. And if you like it, please please comment in the comment section. Please consider subscribing. I do check. I'm very, very pleased to see that I actually have some subscribers, so that's awesome. And wherever you are, just have a fabulous day. Just enjoy every single day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.